Welcome back to Telco Talk right here on CNBC Africa. Now, before the break, my guest and I, of course, talking about fibre to the home. The question is, what is really driving all this conversation, the rhetoric that we've been seeing over the past couple of years? Of course, it is all about connecting yourself and being connected to the internet. On that premise, Aidan, I'd like to start with you, actually. Tell us about the demand scenario that we're seeing on a global level. And we know that it's starting to increase significantly, but the impact and the benefits of having everyone connected to a fibre network.
Look, I think there are lots of questions there, and I'd probably need to pick one of them to answer and leave some of the other questions for everyone else to discuss. But we're seeing unprecedented growth rates in demand for internet in Africa. They're literally sitting at 3 figures, and some claim 195% year-on-year growth in usage of internet. So I think there are a few parts of it. One is obviously the end consumers are sucking up all the bandwidth that's coming in. We see YouTube overriding any other search engine on the net, for better or for worse. And I think currently YouTube's 27% of all internet traffic all over the world, with high sort of media content, rich content, taking up 67% of all internet traffic in the world. So, and those stats may be right or slightly wrong, but fundamentally the image is still the same, no matter where your source is. So, you know, that demand is skyrocketing. It's really exciting and unprecedented, and I think the question you ask is valid. If you step back and say, great, everyone's getting the benefit of these tools on the web, but what's it really making a difference to it from a country perspective? How's this improving our lives? And I think that's a wonderful topic to discuss. I mean, the benefits of e-government. We do a lot of work with educational institutions where we allow, for instance, with Tenet, multiple universities to share their libraries amongst each other and the education material. You know, that's one example. E-medicine, the ability not to have to take a doctor and deploy a doctor to a small rural area, but maybe to take a photograph of a rash or sore, you know, and transfer it to a centralized doctor who can then diagnose over distance. The benefits go on, and the impact in some cases, you know, can be devastating for politics, as we've seen in parts of the Middle East and northern Africa, as people suddenly have power. You know, you have consumer power, supply power is dwindling.
Yeah. So very important in terms of
I think there's no doubt. I mean, I think those stats are not far off what we see. I mean, we see very much the same kind of stats, which is challenging if you think about it.
So YouTube and Skype, the bane of my life. With regards to internet connection, I mean,
absolutely.
You know that here in South Africa, you have to wait 10 minutes to load any.
Well, again, I think that this is exactly the challenge we're saying. Is that what we've been working on is building out the capacity to get that down to the consumer. Most consumers in South Africa, it's true, still have relatively narrow bandwidth connections, and that's why we need to move towards more fibre, more open connectivity, and certainly the kind of things that we're doing now. We don't yet have a fibre to the consumer service, but we have a service which we're offering into buildings and into areas where we have fibre to the curb, where we're able to offer sort of 15 megabit per second symmetrical service, which is specifically designed to open up that pipe. And on that, you know, YouTube videos are great. In business, perhaps you wouldn't use YouTube. But certainly the idea of being able to get a seamless, smooth connection, not just for entertainment, but for all the other services out there that businesses use today, that's critical. And that's happened as a result of various things that have been built out. Just you know, we spoke earlier about the different layers. The thing that really kicked off a lot of the growth in this, not just on the demand side, but on the supply side, was the deployment of these new submarine cables. So I think Seacom, you know, has a reputation for having sort of cracked the market and changed the market up the coast of East Africa. But we're now starting to see the changes also on the West African side. So right now we're seeing the WAX submarine cable landing. It's literally landing in South Africa now. We're a few months away from switching that on, but WAX is going to do for the west coast of Africa what Seacom and Easy had done for the east coast of Africa. And I think once those bottlenecks are gone, the pressure is then on to open up the pipes all the way to the customer.
Okay, it's fascinating. In Africa, we seem to have leapfrogged copper cables and copper lines like we've seen in the developed world. Everyone's got a mobile phone, and mobile penetration is increasing dramatically. I mean, we have 1 billion potential consumers on this continent, Raj. Looking at it from a demand perspective, not only in a global context, I mean, Aidan and Angus making very good points there. How do you see this playing out, and what does it mean for internet solutions?
Yeah, so the demand from consumers for wireless technologies, whether it's through the GSM and now moving into 4G type technologies, or through other alternative wireless mediums like fixed wireless systems, is definitely putting pressure in the markets. Consumers who have access to certain technologies at home want and demand the same when they're at work. So the corporates have a big challenge to, how do they give access and similar access to their employees to what they get at home. That means there's a lot of interoperability requirements that crop in, and the ability to really interchange between the device and the applications. What we're seeing, quite frankly, is the demand from corporates really skyrocketing. This would be in the form of multinational companies, those that are South African based, but also that are international based, who want to do things like video conferencing. I mean, with a trend towards trying to limit the amount of carbon emissions, travel, the need for video conferencing, it becomes paramount. And now video conferencing requires huge bandwidth requirements. And that's where potentially, fiber links between their corporate head offices and their local offices.
So you're seeing more of a trend towards, linking corporates to fiber cables as opposed to homes at this point. I think that would probably be the first step.
At this point, I think we are seeing more on the corporate side than on the consumer side. I think as the consumer side starts to increase, and you'll see certain initiatives by existing telcos or new ones, including internationalizations coming into play, and using things like consumer satellite services, which traditionally has not been done in Africa before.
Arthur C. Clarke once said that one day in the distant future we're either going to have perfect communications or perfect transport. And I think just around this table, we're punting the perfect communications. And I think, just to touch on that whole issue of things like telepresence, the immersive video conferencing solutions that are out there now, you really can get this kind of across the table experience in 3 or 4 rooms around the planet. You really can get that experience, and I think we've found with we've recently done a couple of big deals in offering that telepresence service to customers.
In Kenya as well. We've actually covered this that topic on Telco Talk before, and it's incredible.
It's fascinating.
It's
and I think that the important thing there is that bandwidth then becomes a very, very important component. So our view in the enterprise space, the corporate space, is that what needs to happen is we need to open up the pipe as big as is practical. We need 100 megabits per second to each corporate, and inside that we put the applications. And I think that's the model we're moving towards. You can't do that when you're constrained by copper. You can't do that when you're constrained by bandwidth.
I've got a slightly varying view on it. I think my reaction to that is that a lot of the corporates and enterprises already have the fiber going into them.
Yes.
The reason these telepresence technologies are not as pervasive as they could be. We agree the role is critical, especially in Africa where travel is often difficult or dangerous, is also that the cost is still too high. The prices need to come down for those sort of services to be viable for a lot of businesses.
So how do we get that cost to come down? Is it competition? Is it about
being innovative with infrastructure? I think competition plays a huge role. When Seacom arrived on the shoreline, it was very much our model has always been one of high elasticity. So we've dropped the price and gone for the volume model. And I think when we start to see that terrestrially on these backbone links around the country, because right now it can cost you the same to go from Cape Town to Joburg as it does from Joburg to London. Okay, so the terrestrial fiber prices need still to come down, and I think competition will drive that, and it's natural business economics. When those prices come down and the fiber starts becoming more pervasive, I think we'll see a lot of this stuff coming in. And that's what we're waiting for.
Just to respond to the unasked question there. I mean, we obviously have been a leader in driving pricing, so we've driven pricing across the market. And without giving too much of the game away, I mean, we continue to do that, and we will be driving in terms of national pricing and so on. We have to.
Okay, Raj, looking at it in terms of competition, new players coming into the market, we're seeing a lot of companies being interested in the African model. There's still so much room to grow, a lot of money being deployed in this sector. How can we spearhead this? How can we leapfrog some of the challenges that we're seeing right now from a competitive situation and position so that we do get where we need to be? How long do you think it's going to take us?
Yeah, and I think we need to first of all take a Pan-African view as well. I mean, South Africa is important. That's where we are based, but we really owe it to ensure that we light up the continent, as we say in Internet Solutions. Now, the biggest obstacle for that, quite frankly, tends to be the regulatory regime. I mean, in South Africa, as you know, we have been waiting now for years for the WiMAX spectrum license to be issued. We have no idea, quite frankly, how long that will take. What we've seen is in countries such as Kenya and Nigeria and Ghana, the dispensation is much more favorable to that, and to also look at alternative spectrum bands. So those not where there's a lot of contention to get that at very high costs, which will invariably result in higher cost to the consumers, but on higher bandwidth, for instance, spectrum, which allows alternative providers, for instance, Internet Solutions, to be able to go and offer cost-effective solutions.
But we know spectrum allocation is actually on top of the agenda for Communications Minister Roy Padiachi, and he does plan to do two things this year. To my understanding, it's spectrum, and we know the local loop unbundling is also one of the big issues this year. So do you think we will make headway?
Yeah, so from a South African perspective, and you look at local loop unbundling, and unfortunately, I think it's a little bit, it's too late down the game. A lot of organizations have already started rolling out their own infrastructure. And those organizations really do not have to use and get access to the telecom exchanges and copper, and they have already rolled out their alternative, for instance, wireless solutions, wireless and fiber mixed solutions.
Very little time left on the program. Aidan, last words on fibre.
Look, I think one of the things we haven't discussed probably enough today is the role of fibre within Africa as a whole and connecting Africa. And I believe strongly in an African internet, where instead of Africa needing to fetch content from the rest of the world brings their content here. Even better, we generate our own content within Africa.
How can
and
that
that's
be
our
done?
goal. The fibre, getting fibre into the countries, getting the regulatory environments aligned, but seeing Africa working as a union as opposed to individual sovereign states.
Okay, 53, 54 countries on the continent, so a difficult task, I would say. Angus, last words.
No, I think just to pick up on that, I think we already see that. I mean, we have a global network through Tata Communications. We are the only tier 1 player on the African continent, tier 1 internet provider on the African continent. And as a result, we're starting to see that trend. More so in East Africa because of these guys, but I think we'll see that more across the whole of the continent. As wax lands, we'll see it on the West Coast as well.